Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bloomberg UK. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, coming up on today's program, the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, joins us live from Brussels as we approach 1 year since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also on the program, could a post-Brexit trade deal on Northern Ireland unleash tens of billions of pounds in business investments for the UK? And the veteran investor and campaigner Helena Morrissey tells us about her 3-year plan to double the number of female fund managers in Britain. So tomorrow marks 1 year since Russia launched its war on Ukraine. The invasion has upended security in Europe, placed pressure on NATO, and not seen since the end of the Cold War. So to discuss this and much more, I'm very pleased to be joined by the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. Mr. Stoltenberg, thank you so much for giving a bit of your precious time to Bloomberg. It's a year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's no sign of a peace deal. How does Russia think they will win this war?
So what we see now is that President Putin is in no way preparing for peace. He's preparing for more war, launching new offensive operations. So we need to support Ukraine to ensure that they prevail as a sovereign, independent nation. And this has now become a grinding war of attrition, which is actually a battle of logistics, meaning we need to ensure that they get the ammunition, the fuel, the spare parts, and all the weapons they need, the Ukrainians, to liberate their lands, and that's exactly what the NATO allies and partners are doing.
Secretary General Putin also said in a speech that Russia will, of course, suspend New START, which meaning that there are no treaties governing the nuclear actions of Russia, of the US, let alone China. What does that mean for NATO? Does NATO need to do anything to prepare for this?
So I regret the decision by Russia to suspend their participation in the New START agreement. This is one of the very last agreements of arms control, and the New START agreement is an agreement that limits the number of long-range missiles, strategic missiles and weapons. And of course, this is a reckless decision because we need arms control. And we need transparency. So we call on Russia to reconsider and to respect and to fully implement the New START agreement, including the inspection regime, which is extremely important. And then, of course, we will closely monitor what they actually do. Russia has, over the last years, invested heavily in new modern nuclear capabilities, and we are taking the necessary steps to ensure that our deterrence remains safe and credible.
But does an unregulated nuclear world mean Vladimir Putin is more likely to use nukes?
First of all, a world without nuclear arms control arrangements, agreements, risks leading to more nuclear weapons. And we need to understand that this is part of a pattern. Not so many years ago, Russia walked away from the INF Treaty, and the INF Treaty banned all intermediate range weapons. And now they are starting to walk away from the New START agreement, banning or regulating the number of long-range weapons. So more nuclear weapons, of course, makes the world more dangerous. And that's exactly why we need the agreements. That's why we need the transparency, the inspection they facilitate. And that's also why the Russian decisions to violate the INF Treaty, to suspend the New START Treaty, these are reckless and dangerous decisions.
Secretary General, China looks set to become more engaged in the Ukraine crisis, either through a peace plan or, according to us, even through providing arms to Russia. What would the arrival of Chinese weapons on the battlefield mean for NATO?
That will be a big and serious mistake by China if they start to provide lethal aid to Russia. So far, we haven't seen that happening, but we have seen signs that China is considering to provide military aid to Russia. And we are watching closely, and of course China should not do that, because then China will support an illegal war or aggression against a sovereign independent state in Europe, Ukraine. And China, and this will be a blatant violation of the UN Charter, and China is a member of the UN Security Council. So they should not violate the UN Charter, and that's a clear message from NATO allies and from the United States and others.
But are you concerned that this for NATO could quickly lead to a proxy war between NATO allies and a Cold War type scenario with Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea?
First of all, we need to understand what this is. This is a war aggression by Russia against Ukraine, and Ukraine has the right to protect and defend itself. That is a right which is enshrined in the UN Charter, and we, NATO allies, we have the right to support Ukraine. NATO allies are not party to the conflict, but we support Ukraine in upholding the right to defend their own country. Russia is violating international law. Russia is launching this war against Ukraine, and Russia is reaching out to other authoritarian regimes like Iran. We have seen the Iranian drones, but also North Korea, to get ammunition, to get weapons, to get support. And again, our only answer to that is to ensure that we provide sufficient support to Ukraine so they can prevail and push back the Russian invaders. And China should not, of course, become part of this by providing lethal aid, military support to Russia. The challenge and the problem is that China has not yet been able to condemn the invasion. And we see how China and Russia are working more and more closely. And of course, this is something which we follow also very closely from the NATO side.
Mr. Stoltenberg, what likelihood do you attach to both Finland and Sweden being members of NATO by that mid-July Vilnius summit?
I'm confident that both Finland and Sweden will become NATO allies. All NATO allies, also Turkey, made an historic decision last July at our summit in Madrid to invite Finland and Sweden, and all allies also have signed the accession protocols. And so far, 28 out of 30 allies have already ratified. Hungary has made it clear they will ratify the two protocols for Finland and Sweden early March. I welcome that. I met with President Erdogan last week. I see some encouraging signs. I think it's absolutely possible to get Finland ratified in the near future, and we continue to work for that. And then on Sweden, there are some more challenges that has to be addressed, but President Erdogan and I agreed last week that there will be a meeting between Finland, Sweden, and Turkey in Brussels mid-March here at the NATO headquarters, and under my auspices, and they will sit down and meet and try to address the challenges we have to overcome to ensure that also Sweden becomes a full member in the near future. My message has been all the way that both Finland and Sweden should be ratified now. They are ready and they should be ratified, but Turkey has another position, and therefore we need to find a way to solve that issue.
Mr. Stoltenberg, thank you so much for your precious time. Jens Stoltenberg there, the NATO Secretary General, joining us live from Brussels for an important conversation. Now, for more on the war in Ukraine, William Albuquerque, Director of Strategy, Technology and Arms Control at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, also joins us now. William, thank you for joining us. What happens in the next 12 months? How does this war end?
Well, it's a great question. I think what we're going to see, at least in the short term, is the Russians are going to continue this grinding war of attrition, trying to bleed the Ukrainian forces as much as possible. They think they have significant advantages in manpower and in battle tanks, even though they're very old battle tanks, that they're going to use along with artillery to grind the Ukrainian forces down. The breakthrough could come with the modern Western battle tanks, especially the Leopard 2 battle tanks that have been pledged by so many countries across Europe. These can provide Ukraine with the ability to break through the Russian lines in unpredictable places, to form a real armored core that can spring some strategic surprises on the Russians and throw them back. So we could see in the early spring, mid-spring, into the summer, some Ukrainian counteroffensives that take the Russians by surprise, that throw them backward, and start to bring Russia back to the position they were at the beginning of the war. The big question is always going to be Crimea. How can they advance on that front? And I think once Russian forces are being pushed back in the east, then Putin starts to think about how to negotiate his way out of this war.
Well, we had a good conversation there with the NATO Secretary General, trying to understand also, the China fault line. So whether they're a peace provider, whether they're actually arm Russia, where do you think this will go?
I don't think China wants to get dragged into this conflict. I don't think they want to provide Russia with military equipment. I think that's why you hear the noises out of the United States that they're considering exposing some classified information about conversations that are happening in China. Note that the U.S. isn't saying that they're going to expose actual weapons transfers. So the U.S. is trying to do what they've done throughout this conflict, which is the selective use of classified information in order to prevent bad things from happening, whether it's Russian false flag attacks or now the provision of Chinese military equipment. Because if China does provide military equipment, that gives Russia an enormous well of support to draw upon for more missiles, more ammunition, more artillery. It would be very deleterious to the Ukrainian chances for victory.
So where do you see the UK on this? I know there's been a call for the Prime Minister to send some of the fighter jets to Ukraine. They have promised some longer range weapons. How crucial is the UK's role in this?
Right. Rishi Sunak promised Storm Shadow, which is a longer range missile that can really help Ukraine start to destroy some of the Russian logistics, command and control, and centers from which they're launching their own missiles and aircraft. So I think that would be a real game changer. I think that would really help because if the UK starts selling the longer range systems, that may break some of the logjam in the United States, where the longer range ATACMS artillery for the HIMARS has been something that the Ukrainians have been begging for throughout the conflict. So that could really make a difference.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. William Albuquerque there with his vast experience, of course, on the ground, Director of Strategy, Technology and Arms Control at the IISS. Coming up, Karen Ward from JP Morgan sees the UK benefiting from an investment boost if a post-Brexit deal is realized. We have the latest on the Brexit talks next, and this is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg UK. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, we're still waiting news for a potential deal between the UK and the EU on changes to post-Brexit trade arrangements for Northern Ireland. But some economists are already looking at the potential upside for investment in Britain when an agreement is reached. Now, we're now joined by Bloomberg's UK correspondent, Lizzie Burton. Lizzie, great to have you on the programme. So what kind of boost can we expect?
Well, some economists, Francine, that I've spoken to say that if there were a Northern Ireland Protocol deal, it would reduce uncertainty, which would boost investment and then boost growth. So Callum Pickering, who I know you often have on the programme from Berenberg, said in a note to clients that actually the uncertainty around a potential trade war with Brussels is hanging over investors, and they've built up a £100 billion war chest of cash since the pandemic. Unlocking a deal might help to get some of that investment into the economy. I also spoke to one of the Chancellor's economic advisors, Karen Ward at JP Morgan Asset Management yesterday. Take a listen to what she had to say.
The numbers are that UK business investment is about the same level that it was in 2016. The likes of France and Spain, those numbers are around 20% higher. So it would be really meaningful. And of course, with investment then solves all the other economic ills that we have, which is low productivity, low real wages, fiscal drag. So it really is the secret sauce for economists, business investment.
So I was quite surprised that Karen Ward would say this to us on Bloomberg Radio yesterday, but it means that the Chancellor clearly is aware of the economic benefits of a deal. What I would say, though, is that Brexit's impacting the economy not just through business investment, but of course also through the labour market and trade. And business investment isn't just being hampered by Brexit, it's also the tax environment. But if the government could get more growth, potentially it could deliver those tax cuts that so many in the Tory party are after.
Now, speaking of the Tory party, what is Labour doing? So we're expecting a big speech in Manchester from Keir Starmer.
Yes, it's in the next hour. We're going to see Keir Starmer on his feet at 10:30. At that moment, we're also expecting a document setting out what Labour would do if it were in government. Not quite a manifesto, but the first pledge of 5 is expected to be that he'll grow the economy to be the fastest growing in the G7. Now, on that pledge, you have to ask, how impressive is it? Because is it more about the pace or is it about the level? And how is he going to do it without boosting immigration, on which he's been really tough in his talk lately? The other goals we reckon will be on the NHS, crime, education, clean energy, and you might be having deja vu because of course the Prime Minister set out his 5-point plan for growth earlier, and his priorities earlier in the year, and they both hark back to Tony Blair back in '97.
There you go, 5 points. It's less than 6, it's more than 3. It's like a beautiful number. It kind of sets out the agenda. It is neat and it's substantive. Talk to me about the Northern Ireland Protocol. Are we going to get a deal?
Well, we're currently expecting, hopefully, maybe they can get a fudge by next week. We heard the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday sparring with Keir Starmer. Rishi Sunak suggested that a legal change would be needed to the Northern Ireland Protocol to address this democratic deficit. But we hear constantly from Maroš Šefčovič, the European Commission Vice President, that it's unrealistic to expect a renegotiation of the protocol. At this point, what people in the Tory party, the Brexiters, want is to see the deal. They're frustrated by this strategy of trying to get them to agree before they see it. But the risk, of course, for Rishi Sunak is if he lays his cards on the table too early, there's a big political humiliation that he has to rely on the votes of Labour to get it through Parliament. But Keir Starmer clearly trying to coax Rishi Sunak into that checkmate position at PMQs yesterday.
Yep, a lot going on. Thank you so much, Lizzie Burden. And of course, we wait for that Keir Starmer speech in about an hour. Now, coming up, there are fewer than 200 women fund managers in the UK. Veteran investor Helena Morrissey is working on changing that. We'll bring you more of that conversation next. And this is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Actually, Bloomberg UK. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, despite a push for gender parity in recent years, fund managers in the UK are still overwhelmingly male. There are currently only around 200 female money managers here in the UK. Well, that works out at just 1 in 10 of the people who run Britain's portfolios. Veteran investor Helena Morrissey is looking to change that. Well, Bloomberg radio anchor Caroline Hepker spoke with the British financier on her new high-intensity mentoring program, and she's here with me. Caroline, it was a great interview. So what exactly is Helena Morrissey trying to do?
Yeah, so Helena Morrissey is the chair of the Diversity Project, and they've got this new pathway programme. So we know that the gender diversity numbers in the UK in money management have basically stalled. Last year, according to Citywire, only 12% of people managing money were actually women. That has stayed the same for quite some years. So I spoke to Helena Morrissey around this. The pathway programme is training up 60 women in the UK this year. Very intensive programme, and she's clear about what the goal of that is. It's to get those women into money management, but to manage a fund and to be the named person on that fund, not just within the team. So it's a really ambitious programme, and she wants things to change. So have a listen to what she had to say. I asked her basically why she thinks the numbers have stayed so stubbornly low.
I learned from the 30% Club experience, that was an initiative to create, better gender balance on boards, at least 30% women. We only made headway when we involved men in that. And so we do need to be, I love your expression, Caroline, muscular, because it should feel very robust. It should be like you've got a business objective here. Let's improve diversity of talent.
So Helena Morrissey there speaking. So she was talking about the 30% Club, which was one of her previous initiatives. She's had a long career. She has managed money. She sits in the House of Lords. She's the chair of the Diversity Project. The 30% Club was to try to get women on boards to increase those numbers for listed businesses up to 30%. So she's using that experience to bring to the Pathway programme. And as I sort of said to her, you know, this is more muscular. We've had so many initiatives, so much talk about change, but this is very practical. It's about getting these women into the top jobs. And these 60 individuals come from 33 different companies. They are global businesses. So one of the mentors was saying to me, which I thought was very interesting, this isn't just something for the UK. These 33 investment companies are global businesses.
I mean, I don't know how much it moves the dial. Certainly, what was, you know, behind her inspiration? So from 200, does she have a target of how much she wants that to be?
She was quite reluctant to talk about that. She said that a lot of people are asking her, is this going to be a permanent programme? Is this going to be a global programme? She was reluctant to sort of make any commitments. She was saying she's focused on making this year's intake a success. And speaking to the women, which I did for radio, I did a whole kind of bespoke piece, which was really fun.
Love it.
Back to my reporting days, which I loved. Speaking to the women who were taking part, the mentees and the mentors, they were quite realistic, a bit sort of pessimistic sometimes about the issue, but also hopeful about this programme. Have a listen again to what Helena had to say.
I honestly don't want us to need to have this type of programme in a decade, and I actually think that's within reach. I saw with the 30% Club that when change starts to happen, it can really accelerate and you get a new sense of what's normal. And you're right, I smiled when you said legacy, because it sounds like, you know, they used to call me a veteran. Now with legacy, I'm like beyond the grave next. I mean, I hope this is not sort of, you know, my parting shot, but I've always said, you know, I really don't want to leave this industry until it looks and feels very different. And for me, that means that we have, you know, as many women in it as men, and say people expect, if they have a fund manager come and visit them and if they're a client, they have just as much expectation it's going to be a woman as a man.
Well, thank you so much for that great interview. Of course, great reporting for our Bloomberg radio anchor, Caroline Hepker. Now, also be sure to subscribe to Bloomberg's In the City podcast that I host alongside David Merritt on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. It's out today, is on a similar theme. Luke Ellis of Man Group on social mobility in the UK. This is Bloomberg.